There's a chill in the air, pumpkin flavors are in full force. Dozens of new games are coming out each week, and the Impact Factor is back and better than ever. Welcome to the show. The Impact Factor is what happens when two scientists and two best friends get together to talk about video games. My name is Alex Samocha, and I'm joined this week, as I am every week here on the Impact Factor, by the guy also, out of the generosity of his heart, decided to raise the show's cost by 5,000%. Luckily that's still free. My co-host, Charles Fliss.
Yeah, man, well, all that money I'm not making on this podcast still wouldn't do me any good here in Japan, where pumpkin flavors are not out in full force. I mean, my nearest Starbucks is an hour away. That's the only place where I can get something even mildly resembling pumpkin spice. And now, thanks to you, I'm craving it. So thanks a whole bleeping lot.
Well, everyone is always trying to talk bad about pumpkin flavors. I've seen a very big pushback these days. So maybe that's just you. You're in this counterculture. You're like, yeah, I don't even need pumpkin spice.
Yeah, I didn't like pumpkin spice before. Not liking pumpkin spice was cool.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. An hour away, though. An hour. That's a shocking revelation here, since Starbucks is there's literally one across the street from another here.
Now opening in your basement.
Yeah, right.
If only.
Man. Yeah, how you doing this week, Fliss?
I'm all right, man. I'm exhausted. We had 3 festivals in 4 days here in what's termed Silver Week in Japan, so not as good as Golden Week, but it was a lot of fun. I have shin splints for days.
Gosh.
But hey, I think I'm still maybe doing a little better than you. I'm looking at you here, and you don't look so hot there, man.
Yeah, if there's a little shakiness on today's episode, folks, I apologize. I've been hit with a stomach bug, but I'm like, even though I didn't sleep more than an hour last night, and I was up all night with stomach issues, gotta bring you guys the Impact Factor. It's just what I do.
That's true dedication here, folks.
That's true dedication.
True dedication.
All right, well, the Impact Factor is where I bring my perspectives as a biomedical scientist and combine them with, and sometimes against, Fliss's social scientist worldview to have great discussions about video games. We're in a little bit of a slow season after Tokyo Game Show, but there's still a lot to talk about. So let's get it started right away with some news and views.
News and views.
In an academic journal, News and Views collects the best of recent events and findings. Here, Fliss and I scour through the week in video game news to find the stories with the biggest impact. Fliss, you got your choice of a number of stories, so what is your choice for the most impactful?
Well, I'm actually going to, as usual, steal one of your claimed stories here to get us started, but it really is the most impactful, not just on video games, but just on the industry as a whole. Everything, and us as players. And that's the video game voice actor union representation calling a vote to possibly strike.
Yeah, this was interesting news. I can't kind of follow it organically as it gained traction, and even before a lot of stuff was posted on it. So a pat on my back there. I was following those Twitter hashtags to see this popping up. But yeah, this just in a nutshell. This is the Screen Actors Guild and in partnership with the American Federation of TV and Radio Actors and their interactive division, which are video game voice actors, are currently voting to strike. This is the union that represents pretty much all talent, especially all voice talent in different spheres of entertainment. And since February, this SAG-AFTRA, I guess we'll go with that, has been negotiating with game makers and developers and publishers to try and renegotiate contracts with the union. And this has been ongoing since February of this year. There was a big meeting back in June, and then now we're here at the end of September, and no progress has been made, and therefore the vote to strike.
Yeah, and so they have a lot of stuff trending on Twitter, like you mentioned. It's actually really interesting to me because a lot of other movements and social movements have kind of grown and become a concern on Twitter, but it's so interesting to see something like this grow in a digital medium, right? Where so many gamers are active on Twitter, so many of these video game voice actors maintain Twitter personalities, interact with fans, and so it's a much deeper and more personal connection, I think, in terms of getting fans out to support the union.
Yeah, exactly. And at least from my perception, it kind of blew up when there's 2 separate people who tweeted that they want voted to strike. The first was Steve Bloom. He is a very famous voice actor. If you go on his IMDb, he has something like 600 voice credits, which is just insane. But He's a voice of pretty much everything you could ever think of, but my personal favorite is he voiced Taskmaster in Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3. Shield skills! Aim of Hawkeye! But then I think where I really kind of came to a head is kind of one of the chief lords of nerddom, Will Wheaton, tweeted out that he was voting yes to strike. And I think from there, the hashtag performance matters kind of really blew up on Twitter.
Yeah, man, definitely. I think Will Wheaton weighing in was huge. That's certainly when it first came to my attention. When getting lots of retweets, showing up on sites like Kotaku and the Mary Sue. So good to see the media attention being brought to it, because that's so important with something like this, especially when you have like a relatively small segment of a powerful union going up against publishers.
Yeah, so let's go over what the demands are, because they're negotiating for new contracts in place that are obviously pro voice actor. So the demands of the SAG-AFTRA for their interactive voice actors, these are negotiations, is they request back-end bonuses. So if a game does well, like with film actors, if a game does well, you get some sort of kickback. Here, they wouldn't be negotiating for percents off of returns, but there would be a set kind of union fee that if it goes above a certain threshold of units sold, you get these, this set amount kickbacks. I think it's like 3,300 per X number of million the game sold. They want stunt pay for vocally stressful roles, and also limits on these vocally stressful roles. I can imagine Dragon Ball Z games are something. There's a great video online of watching DBZ actors faint in their booth because they scream so much.
Yeah, and certainly with all the brand new horror games that are coming out, that comes to mind, right? The success of Until Dawn certainly brings that to mind. Mm-hmm.
They request a stunt coordinator for motion capture sessions, because sometimes there are not stunt coordinators there, and voice actors have gotten hurt. Since they're doing a lot more, voice actors also have to do motion capture. They want publishers and developers to be more transparent about what voice role encompasses, so how stressful, how many hours, what this and that, because oftentimes it's obscured, and what the game is about, and how to, more information about the project they're working on. And that also they request that publishers and developers can no longer use non-union voice actors. So let's run through these, Fliss. What do you think in general about the demands of the interactive SAG-AFTRA members?
I mean, first of all, I want to say that I'm in general pretty pro-union. They get a bad rap right now, and that's a real testament to the power of the Republican political machine. But in general, unions are good for workers. They're good for middle-class people. And so, yeah, more power to the union. I think that a lot of these are, I think they range from basic to incredibly reasonable. And I'm actually kind of shocked that these aren't already part of contracts.
Yeah, for sure. I think the stunt pay for vocally stressful roles are actually, let's start from the very basic that I agree with. I think the stunt coordinator for mocap is a no-brainer. If you're doing physically demanding stuff, you want someone there to be for your safety. And then I think from there you start getting some questions about some stuff. So stunt pay for vocally stressful roles, I get that. It makes sense. That is your voice is your tool for the trade. That makes sense to me. One thing that kind of is getting a lot of pushback, even from just members of the game community like you and I who aren't voice actors, is this back-end bonuses. Because this is something that developers of the game, so the coders, the artists, the programmers, the designers don't see. So I've seen some talk online it's kind of preposterous that these voice actors would require back-end bonuses, whereas nobody who actually was involved in making of the core, code design experience gets those kind of things.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of troubled by that. I'm going to actually disagree with you a little bit here, because
I wasn't necessarily advocating for that. I just think that's been some of the pushback.
Okay, but I guess I just think that it's tempting to say, okay, without a coder, you don't have a game, and you can mute your game and still play it. But voice actors add so much to a game, to the point where you have, mild celebrities in the voice acting community who are
Troy Baker,
right?
Nolan North,
Laura
Bailey.
Yeah, Nolan North is certainly the first one that I would think of. But they're people who are not doing, mainstream, like on-screen acting roles, right? So, like you said, their voice is their tool, but they are developing this little bit of celebrity, and I think that brings something to the table. So, when I read that initially and all the criticism that was getting, my first thought was, okay, well, this gives them something to take off the table, right? Like, this gives them something to step back from in negotiation.
Right, yeah, I think that's important too, and we'll get into that with the counter demands. A lot of time in negotiations, you ask for things that you don't really expect to get so that you can meet halfway in the middle and like get what you actually want. But yeah, no, I think it's a matter of, there aren't unions for artists and designers and programmers, and so I think part of it is, there's a little bit of bitterness about them not being able to have this kind of representation, but at the same time, it's just because if voice actors did get this, just because they got this doesn't mean that, the coders and the artists shouldn't deserve to get this as well, right? I mean,
maybe this raises a larger issue that there should be, a programmers union for games.
It's just always, it's always so hard to start a union.
Of course.
Right?
Like,
you don't want to be like, hey, I'm joining this fledgling union. Yeah, right.
Yeah. Just unionize. That'll solve your problems.
Yeah, right. But yeah, I think, especially for how many games, almost every game, including indies, are voice acted now. Like, there was Mike Bithel's game came out recently, the guy who made Thomas Was Alone, that I know you and I have both played. He got Andy Serkis on board for Volume, his new title. Like, that's crazy. But then, I think it does really add to the experience. Like, until, a game you mentioned, Until Dawn would not work without good voice actors. It wouldn't.
Yeah, and I think when you compare it to some of their other requests, like publishers and developers needing to be more transparent about what a voice role encompasses. I mean, if you're already if your demands start with you asking for clarification about what the job actually is, clearly there's a lot that needs to be accomplished here.
The one counterpoint I've seen to that is that there's been a history of obscurity with voice actors because traditionally, if information about a game gets leaked, it's from a voice actor. Apparently they're notoriously bad, or at least notoriously guilty of leaking information, and so they're intentionally kept in the dark because, if someone's going to find out you're working on, whatever, Last of Us 2, it's going to be some, Nolan North, who said, "Oh, hey, when we're working on the first Last of Us, I mean The Last of Us."
Right. Well, I mean, maybe they're we're going to go over the counter demands here in a minute, but maybe there need to be stricter gag agreements in those contracts.
For sure. Yeah, maybe fines, which we'll get into here. And the last thing about the demands, the publisher developers can't use non-union voice actors. It kind of sucks. It sucks that you have to join the union. I think unions are great for protecting a large group of people, but protecting individual people, I don't think it's necessarily always so helpful. Because, right, if you're an aspiring voice actor, you're going to have to join the union, and you're going to have to pay union fees. And there's a chance you could be paying more in union fees than you are actually making money being a voice actor. But, I think that's it's very reasonable. When you have a union, that's pretty. Those systems are always put into place.
Yeah, it's kind of a devil's bargain, right? Kind of having the union and having those rules is a lesser evil, I guess, than not having those rules, right?
Yeah, so the counter demands, though, from big publishers and some developers, and obviously some of these seem like just to meet somewhere halfway. They want to have more fines for voice actors, a $2,500 late fine, or the $2,500 for, quote, not attentive for the services for which you have been engaged. Which is very vague, Is it you're goofing around in the booth, or you're checking your phone?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, you hear stories from voice actors, you read stories from voice actors about being expected to be on call. Like, they decide they want to do that scene this day, and you're expected to drop what you're doing. I mean, is that what they're talking about? Like, you have to be at their beck and call? What if you're doing multiple projects? A lot of people do multiple projects just to survive.
Especially, in different places, too. Not everywhere records in L.A., Then another thing they're demanding is fines for agents. So this is a $50,000 to $100,000 fine for not sending out voice actors to certain roles. And then if that continues for too many times, that this agent can they want language in the union's contracts that say if an agent doesn't send stuff out, the agent loses union access. So that's seems pretty steep. Because I guess the idea here is some of these more prominent voice actors don't want to go out for background roles or environmental roles, or I think there's some sort of I forget the exact wording, but basically background and space filling noises.
Yeah, man. And then there's more than that too, right? Like the one that really stood out to me is mocap, motion capture, not being covered by the union at all. So no paid protections. And the ability for publishers to hire mocap folks who are non-union. That, a lot of what you just talked about to me sounds like there's room for negotiation. There's room to meet, maybe lower fines or, set periods, grace periods, and things like that. But this one really seemed like kind of the sore thumb of the counter demands.
Yeah, for sure. It seems very, as we're seeing, more and more games are using motion capture as a part of their, actors' performances. And so to say that that's not covered is preposterous. It's not like, only 2% of your roles will do that. There's a lot of games, even smaller ones, that are using motion capture. So
even VR games have started using motion capture.
So this could be a big thing. The voting is now through October 5th, so we'll have information soon. And it's already a huge story now, but it could get even bigger because I'm not sure what's going to happen about production for a lot of these titles we're anticipating if voice actors go on strike.
Yeah, I'm sure it would be big delays. Sure it's something that nobody wants, but the threat has to be real, right? So I think we as fans have to stay on top of this, have to read about it, and be responsible in the way we interact with the actors and the publishers in expressing our wishes, because we cannot be blind consumers. We have a real power in this situation, and we need to be aware of that and use that responsibly.
Yeah, for sure. So big story. Fliss stealing the story, the most impactful story. I think so too. It's one of those things that's kind of been really gaining momentum throughout the week. And we'll find out early October what happens.
We couldn't not lead with the strike. We couldn't not lead with that.
It's huge. It's huge.
But I can give you a more cheerful story.
All right, cheerful. Go for it.
All right. Esports, man. Esports got to represent.
Digital athletics.
Esports are making some money, man. The revenue this year is on track to be $278 million.
Dun, 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 dun. $278 million. I
will flood the earth with liquid magma.
Liquid magma. Oh man, that's a lot of money.
There's a lot of money, and it could be more.
Oh.
Estimates predict that by 2018 we could be looking at $765 million annually for esports.
And that's just revenue, right?
Right, that's revenue. That's not like operating costs or overhead. That is money made.
Yeah, so how does this compare to other sports? Because I saw the story and I'm like, this seems like a lot of money to me, but like $1,000 seems like a lot of money to me. So how does it compare with your football and baseball and all that sports ball?
Yeah, sports ball. Hey, I'm always happy to get a chance to talk some sports ball on the podcast.
Yeah, as long as you don't mention the Packers, I'll be happy.
Well, you just brought them up, so since I won't say the word, but I will mention that they're 2-0, undefeated. Gotta love it.
After 2 games, is a big deal. It's I've been seeing it going around. It's like on all these previews, the undefeated, whatever's face off against blah blah blah. I'm like, yeah, undefeated. They played 2 games.
Yeah, okay, well that's just ESPN. I mean, that's gonna be ESPN's coverage of the international when they someday show it. It's gonna be like round 2, the undefeated evil geniuses. It's the same for every sport. That's just sports coverage. It's not. It's all about hype. But speaking of hype, and speaking of money, all right, we're going to start with the NFL. The NFL is at the top of the food chain for American sports. We're gonna keep this American. I'm not talking European football on the podcast. No interest in that.
No football.
Foosball. I'm messing it up now. All right, NFL teams. A new Forbes report that recently came out shows that the average NFL team is worth $2 billion. Although that's a little bit of a misleading statistic, because the Dallas Cowboys, the ridiculous Cowboys, who suck in every way, just in case you were wondering.
Okay,
and I knew
I was, so it's good to know.
Yeah, they're worth $4 billion. They're the most valuable team in sports. $4 billion.
$4 billion.
Yeah, I can't even imagine how much money that is.
That's a lot of money.
Yeah, I get excited about the idea of getting like $1,000 in ones and just rolling around in my bed on it. Right? Like, that sounds great. So $4 billion for the Cowboys. So you definitely have some smaller market teams that are worth less than that. But, so NFL teams worth tons and tons of money. But to compare that to kind of something that's a little bit more, I think, relevant to video games, in terms of scale would be the NHL, right? So the NHL is the smallest of the big four American sports balls, right? Football, baseball, basketball, and then hockey.
Yeah.
You knew it wasn't going to do well once it didn't have ball in its name anymore.
Yeah, right? They messed up. They should have just put hockey ball or something.
Yeah. Well, but it's played with a puck.
Puck ball.
I'm not even starting with that. All right. The annual revenue for the NHL hit a new record in 2013-2014 of $3.7 billion.
Okay. So esports has a way to go, but by 2018, if it's up at nearly 800 million,
right?
That's like a 4x growth over the span of 3 years.
Yeah. So again, if it keeps growing at even a slower but similar rate, it could quickly start reaching at least like Major League Soccer levels before terribly long.
That's pretty crazy. Yeah, and the more money, again, we've always talked about this with like esports becoming a thing that people talk about and discuss, and like I brought it up the other day to my lab and they're like, what's esports? So like the layman isn't even aware these things exist still, I'd say, for the most part. But yeah, we've always said more money and more time is gonna, get esports to be bigger, and time, obviously you can't tweak that, but it's good to see that there is money there, and when there's money to be made, people are going to be interested.
And I think it's a positive feedback loop, right? Because the more money gets made, the more money will get invested, the more publicity it'll get, the more coverage it'll get, the better quality that publicity and coverage will be, and that'll continue to grow the audience and therefore the revenue. So very exciting.
And we've seen some stuff where this is, just recent weeks. I didn't get the chance to put them in the show doc here, but there's been some just crazy developments. So DraftKings, the sponsor of literally the entire world right now, I don't know how they have so much money. The entire San Francisco subways are coated in DraftKings ad. Every podcast has a DraftKings ad. Apparently, at every football game, there's nonstop DraftKings ads playing on the commercials. Either way, though, I think it's not DraftKings, but the rival for DraftKings, something like that, is going to have weekly betting on esports events as well. And I've seen and read a lot of talk about how betting becomes a bigger thing in esports. Again, more people will care because then there's just more money involved in the scene.
Well, and it's also more coverage, right? Because as esports gets a bigger chunk at places like Vegas, it'll start seeing larger spreads. People will become more aware of it. And also another thing that's really cool is starting up fantasy leagues for esports. Yeah. So actually, I'm not going to lie, man. Next year for the International, we're fantasy drafting. We are drafting the International. It's going on. It's going down, man. And you are going down because I have years of fantasy football experience behind me, ready to take you down.
Well, I'm not even going to argue. I played in a fantasy baseball league, but it was like very different. You actually had like a game that you played. Like it had like an algorithm, and like it wasn't just like looking at stats. But then in other esports news, I think TBS announced the other day that they're going to be covering a whole season of competitive Counter-Strike Go, our global offensive, and that's going to air on their channel, just playing, people playing Counter-Strike. So we're getting somewhere with this esport thing, with this digital athletics thing.
Yeah, man, got you saying esports. That's what I'm talking about.
Oh gosh. Let's see, another piece of news here. Moving on. So The Witness. This is a game that was announced at the reveal of the PlayStation 4. This is the new game coming from Jonathan Blow, famous for Braid, the kind of indie darling of 2005, I believe it was. And pretty much The Witness has been worked on since Braid came out, so it's been a long time gestating. So after...
He's been on record saying that he spent all the money he made on Braid making The Witness.
Braid was a big game, so that's got to be a lot of money. And so now, 3+ years after the game was first announced, we finally have a release date, January 26, 2016. Fliss, do you have any opinions on The Witness?
Yeah, I do. I'm a little concerned by some of the things that have been said about it in interviews and from the team, and specifically some of the stuff that you added here to our show doc. But the difficulty, they want players to be stuck.
Yep.
That sounds awful. I mean, I say that as someone who clearly does not have a good rap on difficult games, given that I still haven't beaten Demon's Souls.
And probably never will.
Oh no, I'm gonna beat it, if only to spite you. One day. I will beat it.
Yeah, one day.
Someday. After I beat Bloodborne.
Okay.
Yeah. But I hate being stuck in games. I despise that, and I hate having to turn to a strategy guide or nowadays Google to figure out where to go next. But just I don't know. I mean, there's difficulty is always a thorny issue in games, but I feel like setting out being yeah, you're gonna get stuck is it doesn't sound fun to me.
Yeah, so this is, again, for anyone who doesn't know, The Witness is a heavily Myst-inspired, so the classic Myst where you're first person exploring an island and there are puzzles to solve. I remember playing Myst and being horribly stuck as a child, but if I wasn't beating Freddy Fish's puzzles, I certainly wasn't going to be beating Myst's puzzles. But so yeah, this is, in The Witness, you also play as a character. It's a first person exploration on this very kind of pastel-y, kind of thick, painted, kind of look, but you explore an island and you solve puzzles, and the puzzles involve pretty much moving a sphere through a grid. But yeah, the thing here that's very interesting that the way that Jonathan Blow talks about the game is he said a lot of games make the player feel smart. So when you're beating a level on Portal, you're like, oh my god, no one probably solved it this way. I really broke the game and broke the system, and I'm so freaking smart. But that was the way that's the way you're supposed to solve the puzzle. They made it, so that you were led in that direction to solve the puzzle that way. But then Jonathan Blow is so I don't want my game to make you feel smart. I want you to be actually smart. If
the audience for his game is gamers who are actually smart, he has a tiny audience that does not include me.
Yeah, probably not me either, because some of those puzzle games get crazy. And yeah, so puzzles that you can be stuck on for a long time and requiring you to actually it's not that you're oh, I figured it out and it's clever, it made me feel smart. It's no, you actually have to really, really think through this and solve this puzzle by digging into the core of what you've learned from this game and your core with just problem solving and puzzle solving to be able to complete this. And there's something like 500 puzzles on this island, and the game is 50 plus hours. So I'm like you.
He said that if you're a completionist, you could expect to play for up to 100 hours.
Oh my god.
In this game. If I had a spare 100 hours, I don't think I would spend them on one game.
But yeah, so it's a very interesting game because I think we're moving towards spaces where, again, with Dark Souls and Demon Souls, it's not necessary to hold the player's hand to guide them through an experience. If the players who are devoted enough or committed enough are going to put in the work to get there. And if his puzzles do actually teach you the foundation for later puzzles, then I could see this being a very compelling experience. It's not something we've really seen, certainly something that hasn't been innovated upon since Myst, which was mid-90s.
And I really like the look of the game. I mean, maybe it's because I'm still fairly fresh off of Grow Home, but the bright colors and the kind of large textures appeal to me. It looks like a world that I would enjoy spending time in.
Yeah, no, it looks cool. I've been excited about it for a while, but we'll see. We'll see if I actually pick it up, because I played through half of Braid, and then I got too frustrated. And
I don't know, obviously, can you really have an opinion about the game if you didn't finish it?
Oh, please be excited. But I really like Nick Sutner. He's on the PlayStation developer relations team. He's also on their podcast, which is really nice. The PlayStation Blogcast. He described it as a Metroid Brainia. So the more you play, the more it trains your brain to be able to handle these puzzles. So your player isn't getting any better. You could realistically solve every puzzle. You could solve the game's final puzzle at the very beginning if you're some super crazy smart person who could figure out puzzles like that. But that, in principle at least, the game should train you and work you towards more and more sophisticated puzzle solving.
Yeah, well, if it actually does that, it'll be a cool experience, and I look forward to hearing from you about whether it actually works or not.
Yeah, I just don't know if I want to spend 50 hours playing a puzzle game. It's a long time.
This, just reading through it, though, this game sounds like if it really does deliver on kind of the promises they're making about it, which is always the question with any game, but if it does, then it sounds to me like this is going to be a cult game. It's going to have a small, devoted, very snobby group of followers.
I could see that for sure. So that's The Witness, coming out January 26, 2016. January through March of next year is just ridiculous in terms of releases. So, free time down the drain.
Yeah, it's all gone.
Any other stories you want to touch on, Fliss?
Just very briefly, I want to talk about a little bit of news from Capcom that there will be no on-disc DLC for Street Fighter V. It's been a concern in the past. We talked at length about DLC and the problems with pre-orders and things like that. Encompassing an on-disc DLC was touched on in that conversation. So I think, whether they've already developed the stuff or not putting it on the disc is a good idea.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, if nothing else, even if they have it done and ready to go at launch, including it on the disc feels like an affront, right? You're like, this content is literally on my disc, I just can't access it. How preposterous is it that I can't actually play this? Like, it just feels bad. And I'm someone who's very lenient with DLC. Like, even for me, I don't really care about on-disc DLC. It just makes it easier for them so they don't have to pay for more server space and that stuff, but this is just, again, everything Street Fighter V seems to be doing seems to be very pro-fan, very pro-consumer, and just like, hey, look, guys, we know that you've had issues with us and the industry in general in the past. We're not going to have anything that's not unlockable on disc. It's just all going to be downloads in the future, so that's good.
Yeah, if nothing else, it's a good PR move. Anything else you want to talk about this week?
Yeah, just quickly, Star Fox Zero, that game that we talked about a lot at E3, that
the
Wii
Star
U
Fox
game
that no one wants.
So it was supposed to come out this fall, but it was delayed until spring of 2016.
Wah, wah, wah.
So that means the only Wii U game coming out this fall is that Animal Crossing Mario Party kind of clone game.
Wait, Alex, do you hear that? Do you hear that? That's the sound of the final nail being driven into the coffin of the Wii U.
Please, this coffin's already been underground. It's just, this is someone, like, digging it back up, putting another nail in the already closed and buried coffin, and then shoveling the dirt back on top. Oh, Wii U.
We don't really mourn its passing.
So they don't have anything for the winter. They have nothing. I mean, it seems like this was a very good move by Nintendo, because most hands-on previews at E3 were like, "Oh, this game is rough. The graphics are like GameCube era, and doesn't feel great to play, and it's not fun." So hopefully they can fix that.
At least this way they can fix the textures, so it could be a beautifully unfun game.
Yeah, or maybe they'll leave the textures alone and then try to actually make gameplay that's more fun.
Hey, GameCube era graphics with good Star Fox gameplay, you have my money if it's compatible.
Don't even mention Star Fox Adventures. That game, any game where you're out of your freaking R-wing is bad.
Hey, we've talked about this before. I like those games, but I acknowledge they are not the right kind of Star Fox, and all I want is R-wings.
You just had the hots for Crystal or whatever her name is. Weird.
I was like 12 when that game came out. I cannot be held responsible for that.
Oh man. So yeah, I think those are the biggest stories we have this week. We would love, though, to hear from the community, the news items you all thought had the biggest impact. So please feel free to shoot us an email at impactfactorpodcast@gmail.com. Once more, that's impactfactorpodcast@gmail.com. So Fliss, it's time to put things in perspective. Perspectives is part of the show, well, when any number of things can happen. In academia, it's when investigators share their opinions with the community at large. Here it's a revolving section where we experiment with what's worth discussing. So let's get it started.
Last week, we delved into the physical medium of games for the first time, which was a lot of fun. We got to share some of our own experiences with Dungeons & Dragons and talk about how that game and video games have influenced each other. But this week, we've got something totally different.
That's right, folks. If you want to check out, again, for any of you guys who weren't there, might have forgotten, every single episode is up on SoundCloud, iTunes, and YouTube. So wherever and however you want it, it's all there. So please, if you go back to episode 20, at 46 minutes and 20 seconds into the episode, we start talking about D&D. Please be excited. But this week, we're introducing another brand new type of perspectives. Troubleshooting. Are you excited, Fliss?
I am boiling over with excitement. Can't you hear it in my voice?
I can hear it. In academia, you're constantly problem solving. Experiments must be optimized to discover the answers you seek. The process of identifying roadblocks and finding your way past them is troubleshooting. In games, you often find yourself facing obstacles. Troubleshooting is a part of the show in which we talk about a struggle we've faced in gaming and how we went about resolving it. This week's troubleshooting is, can you really love or understand or review a game that you haven't finished, that you haven't completed?
Oh man, what a question.
What a question. All right, Fliss, initial gut reactions.
My gut reaction is no. No, you can't. I mean, I should add the caveat here that if a game is, like, too painfully unfun to finish, like, to suffer through any more of it for you, then I guess you can claim to, have been driven away from it by that. But especially with story-based games, I can't see how you can really claim to understand what the game was doing unless you finished it.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
And I say that as someone who chronically fails to finish games.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say, this is coming from someone who has finished one game in the past, 3 months.
And I'm really proud of that record.
Oh, Fliss.
You can't be like you, finishing a game, every night. I bet your stomach,
what can I say?
I bet your stomach bug isn't even real. You're just doing this because you hit a point in a game that you can't stop at, and you're just like, well, take a break from the podcast, and I'll tell everyone that I only got an hour of sleep because I'm sick. As soon as this is over, I'm playing it again.
Oh man, if only. I wish. But yeah, so let's talk about the first aspect of this. So there's a lot of reasons why people don't finish games, but one of the first reasons is that games sometimes are extremely long, especially these narrative-based games. So we've got the rise of these super-duper extra-long, mega-stuffed games. So just this year, for example, we've got The Witcher 3, which is an easily, 80-hour game. Metal Gear Solid 5, which everyone is claiming is somewhere in upwards of, if you just ran through the story missions, 40 to 50 hours, but could easily be upwards of 100. And then we just talked about The Witness, which is now a game unlike those. It's not necessarily story-based or character-based, but it is also 50 to 100 hours. So can you review a game without completing it? So this is something that I thought about myself, too, because, again, I haven't played Metal Gear Solid 5 or The Witness, obviously, but I did play The Witcher, and I've finished it. I guess I don't know if I've said that very explicitly on the podcast, but I have finished The Witcher.
Bravo, bravo.
Yeah, thank you, man, thank you. But I felt unqualified to review it even after 60 hours of playing, because I hadn't beaten the main story. But then you get into a bunch of different questions with that as well, because, yeah, I finished the main story, and I finished a significant number of side quests, but the side quests in Witcher 3 are so story-dense, and so, well-developed that, can I really say my opinion on the game, even though I haven't finished all of these side quests? It gets into a lot of questions here, but, Fliss, what do you think?
I want to make a dangerous comparison here.
Charles dangerous comparison, Fliss.
Yeah, I'm like Archer, man. All right. Anyway, Danger Zone. Think about the way I look at a narrative game, like The Witcher, right? It's kind of like a franchise, a story franchise. A comic book series or a film series or even a novel. A series of books where you have a main storyline. You have kind of your main line stories. And then you have all these additional stories, right? So to use an example that is pretty pertinent right now, if we look at Game of Thrones, right? If you read the books, then you could claim to know the story of Game of Thrones up to this point. But there are also novellas and graphic novels and, of course, the TV show that kind of muddy whether you've seen all of it, whether you're qualified to talk about it. And I think you are. I think if you've done that main line, you're qualified to talk about it, because I think that that's the main pillar, the trunk from which everything else springs. So for The Witcher, I think that you are qualified to talk about it, because you did the main thrust of the story. You did what the story set out to do. And we've talked about this before, that I'm a story over gameplay kind of guy. Which is, again, a dangerous piece of my position. But that's kind of the comparison I want to make in understanding these super long games.
Yeah, for sure, and I think there's something to that. But that kind of brings a larger question then. For The Witcher, I still intend to review it sometime on the blog, now that I've finished, but, it's an intimidating review to write. But would you trust a review for a game, say, like Metal Gear Solid 5, where they hadn't completed... Well, two separate questions. What if there was a review for Metal Gear Solid 5 where they hadn't completed the main story, and then a second review where they had completed the main story but had done very, very minimal of the side ops? Where do you find in trusting the analysis and the critical feedback of those reviews?
Well, MGS5 is a real kind of special case here, right? Because it is number 5. And it's part of a continuing story. So have both of those reviewers played through all the previous Metal Gear Solid games? Can I assume
Let's
that?
just say they have. Let's just say they have. And then also, I mean, if it is the fifth main game, but story-wise, only 2 games are before it. So you could have just played Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker, and then Metal Gear Solid 5 Ground Zeroes, that little prequel chapter, and you would pretty much have the full story of what's happening.
Up to that point, yeah, that's fair.
So let's just say that they've both played Peace Walker as well as Ground Zeroes.
Okay, so if we say that, then I am happier to trust the reviewer who has finished the story and none of the side missions. Because in a game like Metal Gear Solid, I'm very story-driven. And I think the side missions add a lot of fun, but if the story is disappointing, then that's going to take a lot of my desire to go through the, 50 hours or whatever it takes to do the story away. It's going to make me not want to do that, right? It's like when you're reading a book and your friend says, no, the ending's terrible. And it kind of takes some gas out of your desire to finish it.
For sure. Not to deep dive too much into Metal Gear Solid 5, but I think it's a good case in point for this discussion. A lot of people said that the story is much weaker than previous Metal Gear Solid games. It really doesn't focus on the story so much. It's much more about the gameplay. And for the first time ever in the franchise, the gameplay is what's fun. And every review I've seen or listened to or read about Metal Gear Solid 5, the reason they gave it such a high review score, the reason that they were so compelled by it, is the gameplay. So let's just say, going back to that example, that you have someone who played for, let's just say they played for 50 hours, but they just did the main missions, whereas someone who did maybe half the main missions, but then a lot of side ops, and they've also played for 50 hours. Like, where do you kind of separate, then, who is more qualified to talk about the game, or are they both equally qualified? Because a lot of what people are saying is, for starters, the story in Metal Gear Solid 5 never makes any sense, even if you've played all the rest of the games. But then this one, it's just all about being in an open world and then having the Fulton recovery system and having the stealth mechanics and having the die rolls and the long-distance tranks and using your partners like Diamond Dog or Quiet efficiently and just having those kind of the emergent narratives of open-world gameplay.
I think this is where, as a smart consumer, we just enjoy getting to read both reviews.
For sure.
But I think certainly with Metal Gear Solid, even though I am more inclined to trust the story-based person, I think that it would be disingenuous to completely discount the other reviewer. Because, like you said, if you just play the main storyline, from what everyone is saying, you miss a lot of what the game is actually doing, and you're actually missing emergent storylines, which, again, to me kind of sound a lot like subplots, but can also be a lot of fun. And I guess, it depends on what we really define as the fun of a game.
Yeah, no, it really is. I think obviously this whole topic is subjective. It's going to matter from person to person. But kind of thinking about this from a gameplay perspective brings me to the next idea here is let's talk about games where story isn't really the focal point of the game. So say a game like The Witness, or even say about something like Demon's Souls, where there is a story, but you're really not interacting with the story in any kind of significant, meaningful way. So how do you go about forming thoughts about these kind of games? Say you want to finish a game like Demon's Souls, but you simply aren't able to. Like, at what point does your opinion become valid?
Well, I don't want to say...
Or at least informed enough that people should take it seriously.
I don't want to say anyone's opinion is invalid. Maybe stupid, but not invalid. Demon's Souls, let's go with Demon's Souls, since I am someone who has not finished Demon's Souls. And you are someone who has, right? So
that is true.
I think right there, you're more qualified to talk about the game than I am. Bouncing off of that, I think that part of the reason that I keep going with Demon's Souls is that everyone says it's worth it. And because Demon's Souls, and I think a lot of these other punishing games that we're talking about, are based on you getting good at the game. There's this idea that if you practice it, if you learn the systems, if you pay attention, you will get good. So yeah, I've put like 17 hours in Demon's Souls, and I've beaten like 3 levels. And I think that that's the cost right now of me learning how to play the game. Just like you have to, go to the batting cage and miss 100 fastballs before you finally get one. And after that, you start getting more of them. You get some more sports ball talk, slip it in. But, it's that kind of thing, right? For Demon's Souls, for me, it took me a long time to learn that I had to get better at the game, and I couldn't just level up my character around that.
Yeah, for sure. Grinding does not get you super far in the Souls games.
Which, as a true lover of grinding, is terribly disappointing, but I still am enjoying the game. So so maybe there's something to be said for that. Maybe there's something to be said for the fact that I am still enjoying the game and want to finish it. But I think in terms of trusting someone's opinion, yeah, they should trust you. They shouldn't listen to me.
Yeah, but as someone who has, you've played for a significant number of hours. You played it for, 4 to 5 times longer than you spent with Grow Home.
Yeah.
And so I know it's not necessarily always just a matter of hours, but it's like, obviously you feel you have an opinion of Demon Souls, right?
Oh yeah, of course.
So it's just like, at what point can you say like, maybe Demon Souls isn't for me? If you haven't seen it all the way through, it's just like challenging, right? Because like a lot of games, it's just another example is something like Final Fantasy 13. That game for the first 30 hours was a completely linear experience where you just were running down hallways. It's like battle, cutscene, battle and then only after 30 hours, once you got onto this open open world, did it become a game that's actually like compelling. So if you had dropped the game after 25 hours, which is reasonable because that is a long time to spend with a game you're not having a great time with, you completely miss out on part of the game. So maybe Demon Souls for you had some frustrations, but potentially had you gotten past a couple more bosses, it would have clicked with you, and then you've been able to form that have maybe you have a different opinion or reinforce your current one, but with more information.
Yeah, well, I think giving up on a game is always reasonable, especially after a certain number of hours, and then expressing the reasons why you gave up on it and saying it's not for me. But there's a big difference between saying this game isn't for me and saying this game sucks. There's a huge difference. And if you're writing a review, if you're talking to your friends about it, if you're telling other people your opinion of the game, I think it's important to clarify why you gave up on it in those instances. So, like, I haven't given up on Demon Souls. As much as you're skeptical about that, it's totally true.
I'm skeptical.
I haven't given up on Demon Souls. I've just become a little distracted by other things. But if I were to have given up on Demon Souls, then the reasons that I would cite would be it's a non-traditional RPG experience that does some very cool things, but the cool things it does do not play to my skill set as a gamer. And so the base time investment would be too high for me. And that's the way I think a lot of people feel about fighting games.
Yeah, that's true.
So I can't say that someone who doesn't want to invest the time practicing 10,000 Hadokens, is a bad gamer. I also think that person shouldn't tell me that fighting games suck.
That's fair. I think it gets to kind of the core of the issue is just, like science, like both you and I, one of the most important things in science is knowing what you don't know. I think because that really helps shapes the foundation of what you do know. And always reaching for hasty conclusions is not the best principle. But I think this kind of brings up the issue of trust then. So we've mentioned a little bit, like, in terms of trusting a review if they had or hadn't finished it. But when you are beginning to form an opinion on a game, Fliss, especially for you as someone who finishes less games than I do, I'll just say it that way. You finish less games than I do. When do you start to trust your own opinion on a game? Like, where in the process, I'm sure this changes from title to title, but where in the process do you start being like, okay, I think I have a pretty good foundation of my opinion on Demon Souls, or, I have a pretty good foundation on Dragon Quest 1, Where does that start to click for you in that, I think I've played enough at this point that I at least understand the core seed of from which the tree of my thoughts will branch from?
Well, I'm very interested to compare my system to yours on this, especially since, like you said, you're someone who finishes a lot more games than I do. For me, a game gets 2 hours. You get 2 hours to grab me. If you don't grab me in those 2 hours, I just don't have that much time to play games. And it's time for me to move on to the next one. So, Super Time Force Ultra, we'll talk about this more down in our experimental methods section, but it's through an hour and a half. And I've had a good time, but I'm not grabbed yet. So it gets that last half hour. It might get more than that if it starts to grab me a little bit more. If it starts to click with me a little bit more. We can talk about that in experimental methods about some of the reasons it's not necessarily clicking for me. And I'm sure you, as a much more skilled gamer in that realm of games, will have some good things to say about that. But for me, that's every game gets 2 hours. That's my system. How about you? You're much more higher, like a much higher volume gamer than I am. Where did you draw the line with the game?
Yeah, so it's interesting because I a lot goes into my decision making process to even start a game. Like all media, I have a very hard time starting a property. Or starting a game, starting a book, starting a movie, starting a TV series, because I know that the kind of consumer I am, I'm going to want to finish that experience. And so it's actually a real issue when it comes to books, because I almost never read books just because I'm like, if I start, I'm going to have to finish, and that's going to take up X number of tons of hours that I would want to be doing other things. And so I actually stop myself from doing it. But for games, I know that I'm going to play games. And so in this question of trust, I start forming my opinion within the first 15 to 30 minutes, because I'm confident that I'm going to get far enough into the game and likely going to beat it that I need to establish my foundation early, because then it starts giving me a good critical ground on which, a critical foundation on which to build as I go through the experience. So like, hey, this is take your time for us. I like this mechanic. I wonder if they'll do interesting things with it that transcend it from where it is here. Oh, they do. This is interesting. I kind of expected an evolution, but the evolution went a different way. This is kind of how I build my thoughts. And I think, that comes from a very different mindset. Like, I'm playing a game that I won't really talk about this week, but I started playing this week, Soma, from Frictional Games. And, within the first, 20, 30 minutes, I was like already like thinking of what I would write in my review, because I know that I'm going to finish the game. I know that I'm going to get through it. And so for me, it's like, for a game like that, I really kind of invest myself immediately, because I have the confidence that for many games, I'll get through them. So I've even powered through some games that I don't really like because I wanted to beat them. There are very few games that I've started and then been like, okay, well, after 2 hours of playing this really isn't for me, I'm going to delete the game and never think about it again. Like, it's hard for me as this is from my mindset.
Well, it's fascinating to hear you say that, because it sounds like your methodology with games is very much my methodology with books. Like, I hate admitting defeat on a book. I will power through, and have powered through, some terrible books. There is a very short list of books that have defeated me. Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix does make that list.
Yeah, all Harry Potter books for me.
Yeah, coming clean about the lack of Harry Potter fandom on this
podcast. Well, okay. I mean, guilty admissions here. I haven't read a single Harry Potter book because they're garbage.
Dun, dun, dun.
Oh,
man, you're coming off kind of rough here. So first of all, I don't read, and second of all, the Harry Potter books are garbage.
It could just be because I don't read.
Yeah, way to represent the video game community over there, bro.
Books are dumb. Harry Potter's stupid.
But if there was a Harry Potter video game,
I've played through. There's a really terrible PS2 era Harry Potter video game, and I played it to completion. So I think that
does that qualify you to talk about Harry Potter?
And I was like collecting all of those chocolate frogs with like the wizard cards or whatever.
Oh yeah,
like those things. Like,
did you collect all of
like
them?
In the movies? I did collect all of them. Yeah.
Wow, your completionist bent on games knows no depth.
Knows no bounds.
Yeah, man. Wow, dang, that's awesome. I mean, in a kind of terrible way. Like, awesome in
what are they called? What are those little wizard trading cards called? They're called something.
You're talking to the wrong guy about this.
Oh, gosh dang it. But either way,
call one of your siblings.
Yeah, they would know.
Yeah, but, yeah, all right, so I think it's really interesting to talk about this. It's interesting that you mentioned that, because it occurred to me while you're talking about your system that part of the reason that I think I like playing at least 2 hours into some game is because then I feel like I actually have an educated opinion about why I chose to put it down.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I have gone back to some games because someone has said, no, it gets better at this point. Like, I actually almost didn't finish Kingdom Hearts.
I mean, the first Kingdom Hearts game has some very, very rough platforming that I remember even as a kid. I was like, man, this sucks. Tarzan level. I hate you.
Yeah, there's some jumps where it's like, you really should be able to make that.
But then the camera is just like spinning around wildly, and you're like, I don't really know where Sora's going to land because his feet are gigantic.
It's definitely a game where it could have used some Grow Home style, unlockable, better camera control.
Yeah, that's just to zoom out.
All right, well, hey, I've got a question then, talking about my own system for trying to develop an educated opinion of games. I want to talk about authenticity. You know I love fan communities. You know I love talking about fans and authenticity for any kind of medium. So, can you be a fan of a game if you haven't finished it?
Oh man, that's a very good question. It's hard, right? It depends on the game, and then you get into a wider swath of questions here. Is like, can you be an Assassin's Creed fan if you've only played Assassin's Creed 3, but not every billion other title? Or can you be a Call of Duty fan or do you have to specify? It's a really good question. I think, gosh, it's extremely complicated. It kind of leads into our next point, but I think there are situations where you can be a fan without having completed it, because a game can, I think, evoke those emotions of, awe and that mental connection you make with grasping the character and the controls. And I think that it's just really the strength of that connection, regardless of the strength with the story or the overarching. I think, for me, a game that I knew I was going to love before I even finished was Shadow of the Colossus. For folks who don't know, this is my favorite game of all time. It has been for a long time. But after the first Colossus fight, I was like, this is a game that speaks to me. This is a game that I cannot wait to go through the rest of. And I didn't need to have gone through the rest of the 15 other Colossi to know that this is a game that appealed to me, that spoke to me, that kind of touched me on a fundamental level, that I'm like, everything about the design, the controls, the world, the lore speak to me.
Yeah, man. I mean, it's, again, going back to my comparisons with other media, I think that I would totally believe someone who says they're a Star Wars fan, even if they've only seen the first Star Wars movie. Because, you can just be so immersed and so grabbed by the universe and, so, into it. And I think that this is part of a problem we get with fan hierarchies, right? Where a person who's played every single Assassin's Creed, even the sucky ones, I mean, I don't know how you pick which
most of them,
but, could claim to be more of a fan than someone who's only played 3, which I think, leads to some interesting and problematic questions. But I really want to go after you a little bit with this, with your Souls fandom, because I think it is fair to describe you as a Souls fanboy.
Certainly bordering on fanboydom, but certainly a huge fan.
Yeah, so, how would you take the criticism of someone who had only played one Souls game? Or how would you feel about someone being a fan of Souls if they've only played Dark Souls 2?
So for the first point here, right, I think, like anything, you need to limit the criticism. I think could be limited to a game-on-game basis. I think it is really kind of would trace back down to how the person described themselves as a fan. So if they had just played, say, Dark Souls 2 and then claimed to be a Souls fan, I'd be okay with that, because Dark Souls 2 is a huge Souls game. It's, a great Souls game. I mean, they're all great, but it's a great Souls game. And if they claim to be a Souls fan and haven't played just Dark Souls 2, I'd be okay with that. My issue would arise then if someone tries to make broader claims about the entire Souls franchise by saying, well, I really hated, let's just say someone saying, I really hated life gems in Dark Souls 2, because they kind of ruined the suspense of health recovery. It's like, well, if you had played Demon Souls or Dark Souls or Bloodborne, life gems aren't in those titles. And so, there are certain tweaks. So I think it's just all about framing your mindset based, again, knowing what you know and knowing what you don't know. And so, I guess, to summarize that, I do think someone could be a fan having only played one installment, and I would just like in the discussion, for them to be cognizant of how criticisms are really only relevant to that specific game.
All right, well, what about games without time limits, games without endings, games like MOBAs or Rocket League or a lot of sports games? What suffices as long enough, as enough hours into the game that you get to make decisions, that you get to make calls, that you get to have a quote-unquote informed opinion of the game?
Yeah, so this is a huge question, right? Because I've played 3 games of Dota, and I currently don't like it. But I've only played 3 games of Dota, and everyone's like, you need to sink in 15 to 20 hours to get good. I think this issue really arises, in my memory, for Heroes of the Storm. You and I have talked a lot about that. This is Blizzard's hero brawler, whatever, MOBA. And the IGN review got pretty infamous. So Mitch Dyer over at IGN reviewed Heroes of the Storm and gave it, I believe, a 6.5.
Which is incredibly low for IGN reviews.
Yeah, especially for IGN, yeah. Incredibly low, and I don't like the map mechanics, yada, yada, yada. But then it was quickly realized by the people who kind of scoured through his Battle.net like information and found his stuff that the reviewer had never played a match of Hero League.
Only quick match.
Only quick match.
Ugh.
But the thing is, to get to Hero League, that is a huge time investment.
Right.
Just getting to level 30 takes a long time, and then the second you reach level 30, you're almost never going to have 10 heroes purchased by that point, unless you're spending real money on the game. And so, I mean, right, we've played a long time, and I think I still have only played a total of something like 11 Hero League matches, and I've been playing this game since June. So it's like it's hard because obviously the time commitment varies from title to title, but I think you do have to invest a certain amount of time to see what the game has to offer. I don't know. Fliss, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think that with games like Dota and Heroes, especially, Hero Brawlers or MOBAs or whatever you want to call them, I think that they have the same kind of issue that fighting games and Souls games have, where they have a very high skill floor. You have to invest a certain amount of time to just get to a basic level of competency with the game. And I think that games like that, where they have separate leagues that fundamentally change the gameplay, that significantly alter your game experience, because the difference when you're just everyone can pick a hero and you're taking turns drafting heroes and there's strategy, and it adds layers and layers. So I think that unless you're experiencing kind of what the game sets out as its highest level, you're not really qualified to review it. Now, when it comes to getting impressions, when it comes to working out mechanics and stuff like that, I think it's much more fair to, again, kind of have my 2 to 4 hour benchmark into a game to get the hang of it. I think that if you play 4 games of Dota and you're not having any fun, then maybe you need to reconsider playing Dota. But if you played 4 games of Dota and you suck, which you will if you've only played 4 games, but it's you like the aesthetics or the gameplay makes you curious about it, then it's time to invest more in it and get a better opinion of it.
Yeah, so it's a really hard question, right? Because I have played roughly 4 matches of Dota, and I don't think I like it. It's just too much. It's too micromanagey, and a lot of the things that I don't like about the genre, like last hits and item shops, are very prevalent there. But then, if you go up to anyone who is a huge Dota fan, they're like, well, you really need to invest 15, 20, 30, 50 hours into the game to really understand it. But, does that mean my opinion on that Dota is oppressively complex for newcomers is invalid? I don't think so. But then it's hard because, right, I want to be able to talk about Dota because that initial impression, that 2 to 4 hour time frame you mentioned, is super important for any game. A game needs to grab you within 2 hours, and I think, with few limited exceptions, every game should grab you within 2 hours. If it's a good game, you should be on board after 2 to 4 hours of play. But then, it's hard, right? Because I would never claim to, speak about Dota as, a fan, but I feel like I know, when looking inside of myself, that Dota is just a game that is never going to click for me. It's not going to be a game that I'm going to play, but that's only based off of 3 hours of gameplay, so it's tough.
Yeah, it is tough. It is tough with those games that require a very high time investment, again, to just get to that very basic level of ability. I think the Dota players who say you need 15 to 20 hours are not being unrealistic. I think that it's like, can you really say that you've played a real baseball game until you've put in lots and lots of time on the practice field? I don't think you can. And
that's true.
But I think at the same time, right, when you're a kid and you kind of go out and you try a little bit of one sport and a little bit of another sport, you end up choosing the sport that grabs you in those first 2 to 4 hours. So why not be the same with games? I think that we have to be nuanced in the way we express our own opinions and the way we receive the opinions of others. And I think that's part of the problem we have with the internet. And here I am going to go bash the internet, right? But when we talk in absolutes, we cause problems, and especially in game discussion, that's a big problem. Saying this is a good game or this is a bad game. I think we have to be more nuanced about that.
Yeah, for sure.
That's something that I have to strive for.
And Dota 2 is no exception, right? I played, tons of Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2's online mode, but I sucked for like 20 hours because everyone had been playing since the first Modern Warfare. And so my kill death ratio was like 0.5 for the longest time. But I think, again, so it's all a value assessment, and it all just comes down to where mentally you see yourself. But because I was engaged with the gameplay systems themselves within those first couple of hours, that's what kept me going and playing that for, 14 days of playtime or something like that.
Should you really cop to playing that much Call of Duty on this podcast?
Hey, man, I enjoyed Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2. It was good. I would just plop it in and do some reading or have some stuff on. It's a lot of college spent doing that.
Yeah, man, well, hey, I hopped in at Black Ops, so, I played a lot of the first Black Ops, so by that point, people were even better, and I think I had like a .33 KD for
rough.
a long time. That was awful. I'd get through a game, and I'd be like 2-6, and I'd be like, all right, did not harm my team too much.
So I know it's a super complicated question, so we'd love for everyone to weigh in on it too. But this is, troubleshooting, really kind of trying to understand if you can really, speak about, love, understand, review a game that you haven't finished, and the kinds of questions that rise around that, because I think we're going to be getting a lot of that coming in the future. There's tons of newer games being released every week. A lot of games are becoming increasingly content dense. And I think it's a question that you have to do moving forward. I mean, certainly I would advocate for disclaimers in reviews if they haven't finished a certain aspect of the game. I would appreciate that because then it informs me of the kind of experience the reviewer had with the game. But yeah, no,
And for those unfinishable games, right, giving us a sense of how much time they have played it. That would be helpful.
Right. So that was our brand new type of perspectives, troubleshooting. And this week's topic was, can you really love, understand, or review a game that you haven't finished? So we had a lot of thoughts there. Hopefully you guys stuck with it through it with us. Bleh. But we'd love to hear if you guys have opinions on it too. So again, that's impactfactorpodcast@gmail.com. So now that our work is done and logged, let's get into our experimental methods.
Experimental methods.
In experimental methods, Fliss and I talk about the video games we've been playing recently. No papers or pipettes, cells, or senses here, just our words. We look at what works, what doesn't, and what we're looking forward to testing. So Fliss, have you been running any experiments this week?
Yeah, well, I played a little more Super Time Force Ultra. Talked about that last week. I'm hitting a couple of walls, so to speak, with the game.
Okay.
I really... you talked about looking at a game and being able to see, okay, it might do this, it might do that. There's a lot of things in Super Time Force Ultra that I feel like I should be able to do, and I am not doing effectively. Like, I can see places where the game wants me to, like, set up certain things, to use the rewind system, to kind of go back and layer my different characters' abilities throughout a level to let me complete it faster. And I'm still kind of having trouble either wrapping my head around that or doing it effectively. And that's a little bit frustrating because even when I'm beating levels, I feel like I'm beating them inefficiently. And that kind of makes even that victory unsatisfying.
Really? So even though you're completing levels, because the game is pretty generous with its rewind mechanics. Again, for everyone, this is a 2D shooter, utilizes Braid-like time rewind mechanics. You can spawn a new copy of yourself or a different hero in, and they fight alongside each other at the same time. And so even if you beat a level, it's not satisfying.
Yeah, that's what's frustrating for me because, last week I talked about how I just tried the game and I could see that there were all these cool things you could do with it, and I liked the aesthetic, and that made me really excited. And I'm still totally grooving on the aesthetic, but I'm having trouble doing kind of the things in the gameplay that I want to. And so I am beating levels. I'm getting through them, but I feel like I'm doing it really sloppily. It's why I'm not streaming the game right now. When I first played it, I streamed it, and I was really frustrated by that. And so again, like, if I were doing it in a way that I felt was cool, I'd be streaming it. But right now I feel like I'm just kind of slopping my way through it.
There's something to be said for that, though, right? Like, I think one of the powerful things about Super Time Force Ultra is that sense of organized chaos, where, like, everything is happening all at once, you're constantly rewinding time, and there'll be, like, 5 different versions of you at the same time. One of them is dying, 2 of them are taking something out, and even if you don't optimize it, I think the mayhem, there's something to be said for the mayhem that's interesting to play through.
Yeah, and there's definitely something beautiful about it. I mean, I like bullet hell shooters, and top-down kind of stuff, so... there's certainly the beauty of like you said, the organized chaos is something that attracts me to the game. I don't want to make any bold predictions, but I think Super Time Force Ultra is a game that I will finish, albeit slowly. I think it's a game that I'm going to play kind of one section at a time while playing other games.
Interesting. Yeah. So, because you'd gotten through the first set of 1990X levels, did you go to the 1999X levels?
I actually went to the 1980X levels.
Okay.
To check those out, because the 1990X levels you'd recommended to me, that's something that comes straight out of Fist of the North Star, one of my favorite animes, what my blog title is based on. And so I'm kind of saving that because it's kind of like saving the best part for last, right? Like I really want to get there and do that. So maybe that's what I'll go to next, since I'm starting to feel a little bit discouraged with my play, and maybe really groove on that next. So please be excited.
Yeah, and it was actually pretty fascinating watching you, because again, Fliss did stream Super's playthrough of Super Time Force. Is not up on our YouTube, but it could still currently be found on his Twitch archive. That's twitch.tv/FlissTheNorthstar. It's kind of interesting the way that you and I approach the same mechanic, because there was a section in the tutorial where there was a giant glass wall, and you needed to spawn a bunch of versions of the Gatling gun dude to destroy the wall quickly to get past it. And like the first time you went through it, it took you like a couple minutes. Again, not saying that anything bad about you, but it took you kind of a while to understand that this is what you need. You needed to spawn a bunch of them to destroy the wall and then get past that. But for me, when I was playing, because I kind of knew, had thought about what I was getting into, the second I got to that, I'm like, okay, this is what I need to do and move past that. And so I think that I started at some sort of different level of understanding of the system, which potentially made my experience with the game better, because I felt less that I was learning about what the system is and more just about optimizing the system. I feel like I got it initially, but getting better at that.
It's very interesting that you mentioned that, because that section was very frustrating me, because that was the section that teaches you to kill yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Because burning the rewinds is the same as burning a life.
Yeah.
And so for me, when I came to that section, I was just like, well, why would I ever choose to rewind when I could get more time out of my dude and then just go back to whatever point I needed to and learn more about it? And certainly there are times in the game where that's helpful, to kind of push as far as you can and then, go back to the point you needed to. But that's the section that tells you kind of, okay, no, the rewind is a mechanic. It's not a life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And then I'm sure as you've been going through levels, it's very important for you sometimes that even if you're alive and in good shape, to rewind, to have someone collect a glorb, or someone to the sniper to sit back there and pick off a couple of distant robots on this far right side of the screen, because it's just going to make your next couple runs, make it smoother to transition to that section.
Yeah.
Right, because the game gives you upwards of 30 rewinds, which is plenty for any kind of. You can mess up a lot.
Yeah,
and have enough rewinds.
And I appreciate that.
Level.
I do. I like that. I think that if the game were trying to be too hard, it would quickly become frustrating. Whereas I think the frustration here for me is more of my own making. It's interesting that you mentioned that about your approach to it, right? Because I think that Super Time Force Ultra is definitely a game that rewards you for already understanding the system. And I think that, this is something that you and I had talked about, just earlier this week, very briefly, but that when we get to games with a higher skill ceiling, I start having more trouble because I'm spending more time understanding the basics of them. And that's just a function of me having played different types of games and also having less time, or investing less time in playing games. So I don't want to fault the game for that, because I think that it does so many cool things. And I've looked up a couple of other people playing it, and I like what they're doing. I really like the kind of beauty that the game gives them. And just because I can't achieve that yet doesn't mean it's a bad game. So in terms of forming opinions of unfinished games, I'm trying to be nuanced here.
Yeah, so I did complete it, and for anyone who wants to check out, I did review it this week over on theimpactfactor.blogspot.com. I thought it was pretty great, but we talked about some of the stuff that was less stellar. Last time we talked about it, the humor is not always so effective. But yeah, no. So I'd be curious, Fliss, to see if you can make it through the rest of the game, because it does escalate a little bit in difficulty too. Certainly, I remember you mentioning last time that you enjoyed boss fights, but the boss fights for me became a sticking point. Because it felt like you could kind of just do whatever you wanted in the level with the time rewind mechanic to a certain extent. But for bosses, especially on bosses that have multi-stages of the boss fight, you have to spend a lot of time optimizing your damage. Otherwise, there was one boss in particular where I lost because I ran out of rewinds because I couldn't kill the boss fast enough because I hadn't done enough damage early.
Oh, well, that's really interesting. I'll have to let you know about that as I continue. What are you playing this week, man?
All right, so I mentioned it last time, but I'm going to mention it here again. So Danganronpa Trigger Happy Havoc, I finished it. Justine and I played through it.
Whoa.
We finished it.
That was fast.
It was great. It's super fun. Well, we've been playing it for a couple of weeks before I brought it up on the show, but so I'm like, well, I know I don't want to talk about it for 4 weeks, but we finished it. It was great. It's fun. Got some answers to the overarching mystery. Kind of discovered who the mastermind of the killing game in the school was.
Heavy stuff.
They left a lot of questions unanswered, though. So please stay tuned for Danganronpa episode, the second version. So it was good. I really enjoyed my time with it. Justine and I fast became fans, so we just want to kind of jump in and we're like, okay, when should we get to? Oh, well, we'll have a lull around maybe end of October, start of November. So maybe we'll get Danganronpa 2 then. We'll play that together, and it's fun to be able to share those experiences with you. So it's fun. It's fun.
Yeah, man. Well, I'm definitely looking forward to hearing more about it. So if you finish that game, that cannot be the only thing you were doing this week.
Yeah, so I got a lot of games. Some of these were going back a couple weeks now, but another one of the games I played as a kind of initiative in September, I don't know if I said here on the podcast, I think I did, was I want to use September to play through a bunch of smaller games, because I felt like for the majority of my summer, I was slogging away on Batman Arkham Knight and The Witcher. Like, they took up a huge portion of my summer, and I'm like, oh man, there's so many smaller games that I just want to sit through and play, and Grow Home was one of them, Super Time Force was another, and the third one that I went through, which was also part of the PlayStation Plus lineup, was Xeodrifter. So this comes from developer Renegade Kid, the people who did Mutant Mudds Deluxe, which is a 2D kind of platformer. Xeodrifter is their take on Metroid, Super Metroid. You play as basically some explorer, and kind of looks like a 1960s spacesuit, just kind of gray and has like the central visor.
So basically, you play as not Samus.
You play as not Samus, exactly. Though your ship does very much look like Samus' ship. And you run into an asteroid, your engine gets damaged, and then you're nearby 4 planets, and each of those 4 planets has basically powers you can collect to get towards the end to find a new power coil for your ship. So it's a very basic, it's kept very simple. You can advance, you can go to any world at the beginning that you want, but you can only progress so far in them because you have to unlock power-ups. So like one of the first power-ups you unlock by being a boss is like the ability to turn into like a submarine so you can go through water sections. Because like pretty much every other level locks off what you can do until you have that. And so it really has that satisfying Metroidvania kind of loop of getting power-ups, feeling more powerful, collecting gun power-ups, collecting health power-ups, collecting tools for enhanced navigation. The game is kept, I think, very content light. It's very simple. I beat it in maybe 3-4 hours.
That's impressive.
It certainly, I think, could be improved upon. Every single boss you face is just a reskin of the same boss who gains one new move each time you face it.
So it's like a Sonic game.
Yeah, right. And it kind of teaches you, like, oh, you just got this power up, and now use that in the fight. Oh, you got this one. But, like, literally the model of the boss is the same every single time you play it.
That's got to be a little disappointing.
It's a little bit disappointing. And the levels aren't really that expansive. I think that could have been done to stand it. But pretty much what it is it's a fun, tasteful, interesting 3-4 hour take on a Super Metroid game. And I love that genre, like, Castlevania Symphony of the Night, Guacamelee, Super Metroid. Like, I'm on board to that style of gameplay. So I had a good time playing it. Though certainly it's not a perfect experience.
Would you recommend it?
I would. I mean, for someone, I played it on Vita, right? And I always recommend games that can be beaten in like 3 to 4 hours. Like, some people complain that it's too short. I would never complain that a game is too short unless it ended before I felt like I got enjoyment out of it. But, within the first 20, 30 minutes, I was enjoying, like, oh, this is very basic. Yeah, I'm just shooting and jumping and having a good time. And it's fun to collect power-ups and be able to explore more places. So yeah, it is a little bit punishing at first, though. You start off with a very small amount of health, and you can die, and then you get sent back up to your ship, and then you have to go all the way back down to the world and get back to where you were. It's not so bad because the worlds aren't so big, but it's still kind of like, ugh, you gotta be careful at first.
a little Mega Man-like in that sense.
Yeah, yeah. It feels very Mega Man-y in terms of aesthetic. One thing that I think it does really well is what they've adapted from Mutant Mudds Deluxe. Mutant Mudds is essentially just like a Mario platformer, a Mario-style platformer, but with the mechanic of you can jump between the foreground and the background. And when you're in the background, the foreground blurs, and you can see your sprite is small, but you can like do interesting things that way. And there's a power-up in Xeodrifter that allows you to do that. You can hop into the foreground, or you can hop into the background to do stuff, and it has this really great, like, image blur, and you're small, and it's really kind of cool. It feels great to, like, hop between the foreground and the background. So I think they did that extremely well. It's kind of their trademark, but...
Very cool. Little Paper Mario-style action there.
Uh-huh. So that, again, is still free on PlayStation, so...
I've already downloaded it, so good to get your review here. I'll definitely give it a look.
I mean, you like Castlevania Symphony of the Night, so...
I do, so yeah. And any game that can be beaten in 4 hours is music to my ears. Knowing my
I am
ability,
pretty good.
I was going to say, you beat me to it. I was going to say, with my ability, we're probably talking like 5 to 6 hours, but that's still pretty good.
So those are the games. I've been playing a lot of other stuff, so please be excited, because as I already hinted at, I started playing Soma this week, which has been pretty great so far. But
excellent.
So... please stay tuned. So let's finish up with some odds and ends in a section we call errata. This is random movies, TV, life, etc. I've got some stuff written here, but do you have any suggestions or recommendations or things to share with the folks about?
Well, I've been talking about Sons of Anarchy here on the podcast for a couple weeks, and that's not going away. I'm now into season 5, so if you're wondering what I'm doing with my time that should be spent on video games, that's what I'm doing with it. But
spent that national holiday not playing no games, but just watching Sons of Anarchy.
Well, actually, I was spent it doing festivals, which is why I have these crazy shin splints right now. As I said, they haven't gone away over the course of the podcast, unfortunately. Ibuprofen is my best friend. But actually, what happened this week, the kind of second to last festival of the season, and the last one isn't for another month. So things are slowing down, going to get into more of a rhythm. I'm excited about that because games and streaming are part of that rhythm. So that'll be good.
Yes.
That'll be good. But, I mentioned briefly Game of Thrones earlier. I've been frustrated with Game of Thrones. I have not been enjoying the TV show a whole lot, and obviously it takes a million years for one of those books to come out. Sons of Anarchy, I realized, is scratching that itch.
Okay. You got houses, different bike gangs of different houses.
Yeah, you've got different groups and different houses, and you've definitely got, like, characters who are, like, the king and the queen and the prince, to the point where some characters are even, called that in the show. And I think the show is very aware of it, but the kind of medieval kingship drama is very much what the show is doing. And so, it's that exactly it. It's Shakespeare with motorcycles. So, it's awesome.
Hopefully you didn't watch the Emmys, because they had a little Emmys reel this year at the award show where they're like, these are the shows that ended this year, and they played the endings of every single TV show that ended in this past year. So I now know how Sons of Anarchy ends.
Well, don't tell me, for the love of God.
All right, so Charlie Hunnam is on his bike.
I'm going to kill you.
All right, so if this is Game of Thrones, who is Charlie Hunnam, and who is Charlie Hunnam's butt?
Oh, man. I know you want to know who his butt is, but those are secrets that may have to wait for another day. But tell me, you got some cool stuff to talk about, though, right?
Yes. So this past Saturday, Justine and I went and saw The Visit.
How was it?
This is the new, gasp, M. Night Shyamalan movie. That's right. I went to a theater and paid money to see an M. Night Shyamalan movie.
I am. Is the twist that it was good? Is that the twist?
The twist is that it was good.
What? Oh, I didn't see that coming. No one saw that coming. That came out of nowhere.
I know. M. Night Shyamalan, he twisted us and twisted us back. His whole Lady in the Water and Signs and Last Airbender and
The Village,
The Following and The Village, or not The Following, whatever. Those were all just to twist us when he makes a decent movie again. So The Village was really freaking fun, man. I think you would enjoy it.
Yeah.
It's set, as a kind of quasi found footage film because two kids are sent up to their grandparents' house because the grandparent and the mom had been estranged for a while. Then there's a younger brother and an older sister. The older sister thinks herself to be a filmmaker, and she's like documenting her experiences and wants to like talk to her grandparents about how that her mom and her grandparents had a falling out. But then like I think it's just so like fun. Like the movie is very light. There's a lot of comedic moments, but you definitely have that unnerving sense of dread as you get further on because her grandparents are pretty weird. They're not allowed. The kids aren't allowed to go out past 9:30 at night, and this isn't any real spoiler territory. But one night they kind of peek their head out of the room, and their grandmother is naked, clawing at a wall.
What?
And they're like, but then it kind of develops from there. You get a little bit of insights. It's kind of cool too because, astoundingly, the child actors are incredible.
Yeah,
they're really good. The movie would not have worked if the kids sucked at acting, but they're both pretty good. And, they're interesting characters, and you can see how they're kind of damaged. They're kind of reeling from their father left their mom, and just, so kind of dealing with that kind of loss and understanding that. And then there's definitely the theme of old people be scary. Because it's just like,
I don't know.
old
I don't
people
know
are
if that's
weird.
a good film for me to watch, given that I live in rapidly aging Japan.
Yeah, pretty much what
filled with
happened.
Old people.
Pretty much how it happened in The Visit just is happening next door to you because this is every single person is old. But yeah, it builds up to a pretty satisfying conclusion. The movie, I'd say, if I'm talking critical feedback here, it takes a little bit too long. The movie is only an hour and a half, but I feel like probably 15 minutes could have been cut out. It takes a little long to get to what you kind of suspect. Like, the twist is pretty predictable. As far as M. Night Shyamalan movies go, you can see it kind of coming, but it doesn't make it any less fun. And there's certainly moments where we had a pretty decent crowd of people watching it, and so definitely when shocking things happened, people were like, "Ah!" in the theater.
Excellent.
And that's always fun with a horror movie.
Yeah, that's way more fun.
But yeah, no, it's just like it's kept very, I think Shyamalan must have just had a very good editor for this movie, because it's kept short, it's kept simple, it's kept fun,
So
the story.
basically everything The Last Airbender was not.
Yeah, the kids are great and interesting, and like the jokes are funny. The jump scares are funny because like some of the jump scares is just the grandma showing up. Like it's scary because she looks old. Yeah, exactly. It's like, why do I jump about her face showing up in this camera? She's not even like bruised or bloody or vomiting. She's just an old person's face popping up on screen. So
the summary of this episode is Alex is terrified of old people.
Old people be scary.
Old people be scary, yes. Old people be scary.
So I would recommend it. I mean, we're getting close to my favorite month of the year, October.
Everybody loves October.
Horror Fest. I especially love it with my adoration of horror movies. The last year I created a list of horror movies to watch and kind of watched through a bunch of them. I'm doing the same thing this year, and maybe even something podcast related. So please be excited about that.
Oh, man. Well, hey, that's awesome. Yeah, we share a love of October for different reasons. I am notoriously squeamish about horror movies, but Halloween is my favorite holiday. Costumes, parties, cosplay. I'm going to have some good stuff working up for that for this year's Halloween, so please be excited for that. But hey, as squeamish as I am about horror movies, it sounds like there are some sweet horror movies upcoming.
Yeah. So this is my other quick piece of errata. So, Jordan Peele of Key & Peele fame. I don't know if you've watched that. This would be my suggestion. Key & Peele is actually surprisingly good. I'd recommend people watch it, give it a chance. But Key & Peele, this is their last season, and so it was kind of unknown what the two actors are going to do. So Peele has announced that he's making a new horror movie as his first Key & Peele project, to which I was like, yes! In an interview with, I'm not sure, but I found it on shocktillyouDrop.com, which is kind of this horror movie info site. Peele was talking about how he likes horror like comedy because they're the two genres that can really kind of play with social conventions and explore social issues in interesting ways. And so one of the things he's doing with his new film, Get Out, that's the name of the film, Get Out, is to kind of address race and talk about race in a different way. And so the premise of Get Out, his new horror movie, is that I'm assuming, as a black male, is visiting his Caucasian girlfriend's family out in the middle of nowhere, and I'm sure stuff goes down. So everything about this, Jordan Peele exploring social issues, a black male lead visiting a Caucasian family. All that sound, especially with like his history of comedy, like there's gonna be a lot of good stuff there. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, man, very exciting. Just the whole setup, everything you just mentioned, it all sounds good to me.
So I don't know when it's coming. Maybe it's 2016, maybe it's 2017, but it's Get Out. I'm excited. We've been living in a pretty good age of horror movies, and hopefully this continues the trend.
Crimson Peak. I can't wait for Crimson Peak.
It's going to be good.
Yeah, I'm still excited.
So that's
about
it. Yeah, me too. Fliss, do you want to wrap us up here?
Yeah, man. That's it for episode 21. How about that? Our podcast can drink.
Let's take it out for a round of beers.
Yeah, a round of root beers.
Yeah. Hey, man. Now you're talking my language.
Yeah, well, hey, thanks for hanging out with us. You can find me at the CFliss. That's at THECFLISS. I'm having a lot of fun tweeting out different photos from my travels in Japan. It's September, and that means the blog is back. This week, I actually took a break from travel blogging to talk about the anime cosplay that are driving me to go to the gym. And in doing that, I also ended up discussing the different ways in which men are represented in anime and manga, targeted at men and women. The short version is that I would have much less need of a six-pack if I wanted to cosplay a character from stories that were written with girls in mind. I also, if you want something that's less, analysis heavy and more photo heavy, just today put up pictures of my experience with sumo. I got to see professional sumo live back in August. It was awesome. I took lots of pictures. So check that out at flissofthenorthstar.blogspot.com. I'm also happy to tell stories about all this in person. I'll be back to streaming this week. Check me out at Fliss of the North Star on twitch.tv.
Sweet. Those posts are pretty good. Yeah, you should really go for the shoujo version of the ideal guy.
Yeah, man.
Much easier.
I just need to get my eyes like another 2 inches bigger and naturally sparkly, and I'll be all set.
You could do it. So thanks, everyone, for listening to the episode. You can find each and every episode of the podcast on soundcloud.com/theimpactfactor or by searching The Impact Factor on the iTunes Store. We love reposts, favorites, and reviews, and they really help to grow our community, so please keep that up. We know a couple of you are doing it. I really appreciate that. So, again, every episode available everywhere on soundcloud.com/theimpactfactor or The Impact Factor on the iTunes Store. Speaking of iTunes, we got a new review. I was really worried. Last week we went through all of the ones that we had, but we got a new one. So this is from user M3S2. And the title of the review is The Best Nerds Around. The review reads, if you are interested in video games and all things nerd, this podcast is for you. You will enjoy listening to intelligent discussion and analysis. You can't miss listening to Alex and Charles. 5 out of 5.
Oh,
so
man.
User M3S2.
What a great review. Wow, I'm blushing.
I know. It's great. So we appreciate that you, M3S2, you like our intelligent discussion and analysis.
Yeah, so we're glad that you wouldn't want to miss listening to us.
So thank you so much. Please, if you're listening at any point in the show and you haven't written us a review on iTunes, we'd really appreciate if you write us a review there. We have 9 reviews now. 1 more and we'll have double-digit reviews, which is crazy. It's crazy.
Man. Now, if we could only get up to as many reviews as episodes, a boy can dream.
Yeah,
a boy can dream.
Great. A boy can dream. So you can follow me on Twitter at Alex Samocha. That's Alex Samocha, like the coffee. You can check out The Impact Factor on YouTube for past episodes, Let's Plays, and more. The link is in the description. You can watch me play games Wednesday and Thursday nights at twitch.tv/megalodonphd. But if you're hearing this now on Friday and Thursday, there's a good chance I didn't stream at all this week because I'm feeling extremely under the weather. So The Impact Factor is an extension of my blog about video games. That's the impactfactor.blogspot.com. Check there every Tuesday for a new review or article. This week I reviewed Super Time Force Ultra by Capybara Games on the PS4. And every Friday for my curation of the best written pieces from the world of gaming called News and Views. Send any comments and suggestions for the podcast to impactfactorpodcast@gmail.com. And until next time, make it impact.